They grabbed his arm before the door was even closed. Not gently, not with a question. Fingers clamped around fabric, knuckles white, the kind of grip used when someone has already decided who you are. A voice cut through the hush of first class, sharp enough to make heads turn. "Sir, you need to stand up. Now!" Ethan Brooks did not move. For a split second, the cabin froze. Champagne flutes hung mid-air. A man in the second row stopped chewing. Somewhere behind the galley curtain, a service cart rattled once, then went still, as if the plane itself had decided to listen. Ethan sat in seat 1A, shoulders back against cream leather, hands resting flat on his thighs. His hoodie was charcoal grey, soft cashmere, unmarked. No logo. No brand to announce value. His sneakers were clean but worn, laces tied tight with habit, not style. He looked tired, not drunk, not angry. Just a horde in the way men get when they have carried too much responsibility for too long. The hand on his arm tightened. "Sir." The voice belonged to Lauren Hayes, lead flight attendant, early 40s, posture rigid, smile already gone. Her eyes flicked to the aisle, then to the front of the cabin, where Margaret Whitmore stood gripping the back of a seat like it was an anchor. Margaret was breathing fast, controlled, but fast. 52 years old, perfect blowout. Pearls at her throat. Her lips were pressed thin, the way they got when the world failed to obey on command. "He's refusing to move," Margaret said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told you, he's in my seat. I don't feel comfortable." Comfortable. The word landed heavy. Ethan lifted his eyes, slow, deliberate. He looked at Lauren first, then at Margaret. He noticed everything. The way Margaret's fingers trembled despite her practiced calm. The way Lauren's jaw was set too tight, like someone bracing for impact. The way a man across the aisle had already angled his phone, pretending to check a message while recording. "This is seat 1A, Ethan said. His voice was low, even. American. No accent to hide behind. "And that's my boarding pass." He tapped the console beside him. The paper lay there, pristine. First class, paid in full. Margaret didn't look at it. "That's impossible," she snapped. "I always sit here, always." She turned to Lauren, eyes flashing. "There must be a mistake. People like him get upgraded sometimes when there's space." "But I booked this months ago." "People like him." Lauren inhaled through her nose. She had been flying for over a decade. She knew turbulence. She knew drunk executives and screaming toddlers and couples breaking up at 30,000 feet. What she also knew was hierarchy. Who mattered? Who complained loudest? Who wrote letters that reached corporate? She glanced at the boarding pass. It scanned green on her tablet. Seat 1A, Ethan Brooks. Valid. Her stomach tightened. "Sir," Lauren said, lowering her voice, leaning in just enough to feel authoritative. "I understand you believe this is your seat, but we have a situation here. Mrs. Whitmore is one of our most valued guests. Perhaps we can find you another option. We have an excellent seat in premium economy. Extra legroom. I can offer a voucher for the inconvenience. Ethan's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something sharper. You want me to move, he said, because she doesn't like where I'm sitting. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Margaret let out a short laugh, brittle and loud. This is ridiculous. Look at him. A hoodie? In first class? I have a charity gala in London tomorrow. I need to rest. I cannot sit next to someone who makes me uneasy. Uneasy. The word rippled through the cabin. A woman 2 rows back shifted in her seat. A man near the window frowned, then looked away, unwilling to be involved. Ethan felt the familiar heat rise, controlled, banked like a fire behind steel. He had felt this before. Boardrooms, elevators, private clubs with polite smiles and quiet doors that never quite opened. No, he said. Calm. Final. I paid for this seat. I'm not moving. Lauren straightened. Sir, you are causing a disturbance. Ethan's eyes flicked to Margaret, who was now clutching her handbag to her chest like a shield. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't stood, hadn't touched anyone. I haven't moved, he said. I haven't yelled. She's the one making a scene. Margaret gasped, a practiced sound. See, aggressive, I told you. I feel threatened. Lauren's fingers tightened around her tablet. She hesitated. Just a second, long enough for the wrong decision to settle in. I'm going to get the captain, she said. Please do, Ethan replied, already leaning back, sliding his headphones down around his neck. Get whoever you need. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Daniel Carter stepped out with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Late 50s, silver hair, broad shoulders straining slightly against a crisp uniform. He surveyed the scene in one sweep. Crying woman, tense crew, black man in a hoodie sitting where trouble usually sat. He didn't ask for the boarding pass. Son, he said, voice loud, carrying. We don't tolerate disruptive behavior on my aircraft. You need to gather your things and follow the crew to the back, or you're getting off this plane. Ethan looked up at him. Really looked. The gold stripes, the name tag. The eyes already decided. Captain Carter, Ethan said. For the record, I'm asking you to verify the passenger manifest. If you do that, you'll see I'm in the correct seat, and removing me would violate federal aviation regulations regarding ticketed passengers who pose no threat. Carter scoffed. Don't quote regulations at me. I've been flying longer than you've been alive. I have a passenger who feels unsafe. That's enough. Unsafe, Margaret echoed quickly, nodding, tears now forming on cue. He looked at me. The wrong way. That was it. Carter turned, already reaching for his radio. Dispatch, this is Summit Air Flight 909, requesting law enforcement at the gate. Level 2 disturbance in first class. Passenger refusing crew instructions. Phones came up instantly. The sound was subtle, a soft chorus of clicks and taps. Ethan noticed a teenager 2 rows back, eyes wide, camera steady. He met his gaze and held it. Record everything, Ethan murmured as he stood at last. Hands visible, one of the officers barked when they boarded moments later, filling the aisle with dark uniforms and practiced indifference. "I am complying," Ethan said, calm as stone. He did not resist as they took his arm. He did not shout as they twisted it behind his back, harder than necessary. He walked, step by step, past the wide-eyed stares, past the whispers, past the woman who now shrank away from him, satisfied. As they dragged him onto the jet bridge, Carter's voice followed, loud, triumphant. "You're banned from Summit Air for life." "For life," Ethan repeated softly. He straightened his hoodie, rolled his shoulder against the pane, and lifted his head. "Captain," he said, voice steady. "You're right." Carter laughed as the door slammed shut. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone that did not look like a phone anyone else owned. Black, slim, unmarked. 60 seconds later, an entire airline would learn exactly who they had just put their hands on. The jet bridge was colder than the cabin, metal walls sweating with rain, fluorescent lights buzzing like they had something to hide. Ethan Brooks stood between two officers who suddenly weren't touching him anymore. Not because they had been told to stop, because something in the air had shifted. Authority is a fragile thing. It cracks the moment it senses a larger shadow. Officer Mark Sullivan, early 40s, broad shoulders, tired eyes, cleared his throat. "Sir, we're going to escort you to the terminal while we sort this out." Ethan didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on the sealed aircraft door, the white Summit Air logo smeared by rain, the faint vibration of engines beginning to spool somewhere inside. He could feel it. The momentum, the machine moving without him. "Sort what out?" Ethan asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut straight through the hum. "I was removed from my assigned seat without cause. I was physically handled. And I was banned from an airline that hasn't yet realized it no longer has the authority to ban me from anything." Sullivan frowned. "Sir, I don't know what you mean by that." "You will," Ethan said. He lifted the phone to his ear. Not hurried, not dramatic, like a man checking the time. It rang once, then a voice answered, clear, controlled, British, but softened by years of international boardrooms. "Yes, Mr. Brooks." Jonathan Reed didn't waste time with pleasantries. He never did. 48 years old, former naval intelligence before private equity. A man who spoke only when there was something worth saying. "Jonathan," Ethan said, "what's our exposure with Summit Air?" There was a pause, a real one. The kind that meant Jonathan was already pulling the numbers from memory, not a screen. As of last quarter, Brooks Capital holds controlling lease rights on 62% of their long-haul fleet, all wide-body aircraft, primarily 777 series. We also hold 12% of voting shares through indirect vehicles. And the covenants. "Technically in arrears by 48 hours, Jonathan replied. "We've been granting a grace period as a courtesy. Revoke it," Ethan said. The word fell heavy. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Around them, the rain intensified, drumming against the jet bridge roof like a countdown. "Sir," Jonathan said carefully, invoking the tone he reserved for irreversible decisions that will trigger an automatic default. It will ground their aircraft globally. Thousands of passengers. They dragged me off that plane, Jonathan. They didn't ask. They didn't verify. They didn't care. They did it because they decided who I was allowed to be based on how I looked. His voice hardened, just enough. Call the default. Initiate asset repossession. Effective immediately. Understood, Jonathan said. No hesitation now. Repossession orders are being transmitted to the FAA and Eurocontrol as we speak. One more thing, Ethan added. Flight 909. It's pushing back. Jonathan's fingers were already moving. Stopping it now. Ethan lowered the phone. Officer Sullivan stared at him. His partner shifted, uneasy, hand hovering near his radio. Sir, Sullivan said, choosing his words carefully. Who did you just call? Someone who answers, Ethan replied. You might want to notify the tower. There's a stolen aircraft taxiing on their runway. Sullivan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You can't just say things like that. Wait for it, Ethan said. 60 seconds. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Carter was smiling. He adjusted his seat, rolling his shoulders, the tension from the confrontation already draining away. Problem solved. He glanced at the overhead panel, then keyed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the brief delay. A minor security issue has been resolved. We are now cleared for departure. Margaret Whitmore exhaled in relief, lifting her champagne flute again. Around her, first class settled back into itself. Power always does. Carter reached for the radio. Kennedy Ground, Summit 909. Ready to taxi. Static. He frowned. Kennedy Ground, Summit 909. Ready to taxi, runway 3, 1 left. The response came, but it wasn't the voice he expected. It was sharper, older. The supervisor. Summit 909. Hold position. Do not start engines. I repeat, hold position immediately. Carter's smile faded. Tower, we are already pushed back and clear. What's the issue? Summit 909. We have received an asset seizure notification on your aircraft. Registration, November 7 79. Papa Alpha. The owner has revoked the certificate of airworthiness effective immediately. You are grounded. For a second, Carter thought he had misheard. He laughed. Tower, check your records. Summit owns this aircraft. Negative 909. Registry shows the aircraft is leased from Brooks Capital Group. Legal notice received. If you start those engines, you will be committing a felony. Shut it down. The cockpit went silent. The words Brooks Capital echoed in Carter's mind, dredging up an image he couldn't place. A magazine cover in an airport lounge. A headline about aggressive acquisitions. A man in a suit with eyes like knives. His hands trembled as he cut the throttles. Dave, he whispered to his first officer. Pull up the manifest. Passenger we removed. Seat 1A. Dave's fingers flew across the tablet. His face drained of color. Captain. Name's Ethan Brooks. Carter felt something cold slide down his spine. At that exact moment, the cockpit screens flickered, then went black. The hum of the air conditioning died. The lights cut out, replaced by emergency strips along the floor. In the cabin, confusion erupted. Margaret screamed as champagne spilled down her blouse. Someone shouted. Someone else started praying. Back on the jet bridge, Sullivan's radio crackled violently. "Unit 4, come in. Do you have an Ethan Brooks in custody?" Sullivan swallowed. "Affirmative." "Release him immediately," the dispatcher barked. "Do not process. Do not detain. The mayor's office is on the line. The airline's CEO is in a panic." Sullivan looked at Ethan like he was seeing him for the first time. "Sir, we didn't know." Ethan adjusted his grip on the phone. "I know." Another call came through. "Jonathan again. Default is live. Stock is in freefall. Media has picked it up." "Good," Ethan said. "What would you like us to do with Flight 909? He glanced at the dark silhouette of the plane through the rain. The powerless machine. The people inside it, trapped by arrogance. "Let it sit," he said. "For now." Sullivan stepped back, clearing the path. "Sir, would you like an escort to the lounge?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm going to the Ritz." He turned and walked away, footsteps steady, back straight, hoodie darkened by rain. Behind him, an empire had just begun to collapse. By the time Ethan Brooks reached the curb outside Terminal 4, the rain had turned from steady to punishing. Water sheeted down the glass walls of the terminal, distorting reflections into long, trembling shapes. Yellow taxis idled in a crooked line, exhaust rising like breath in the cold. Ethan stopped under the awning, rolled his shoulder once, testing the damage. Pain flared, sharp and bright, then settled into a dull, persistent throb. He welcomed it. Pain meant clarity. Behind him, the airport was no longer an airport. It was a rumor factory. Phones rang, voices overlapped. A ripple of urgency spread through the building like a fault line cracking open. People didn't yet know what had happened, only that something had gone wrong, badly, and that it involved money, power, and a name that suddenly mattered. Inside Summit Air's operations center in Dallas, the first alarm went off at 12:41 in the morning local time. It was not a siren. It was worse. A soft, polite chime that preceded disaster. Marcus Hale, Summit Air's chief operations officer, was barefoot in his kitchen, staring at a tablet propped against the espresso machine. He had been half asleep, robe untied, hair still damp from the shower. The screen refreshed again, and again. Red. Every route map pulsed crimson. Atlantic crossings, European legs, high-yield corridors that printed money when everything went right. His phone buzzed in his hand, then buzzed again, then didn't stop. He answered the first call without checking the number. "What do you mean, grounded?" Marcus snapped. "That doesn't make sense." On the other end, a young analyst sounded close to tears. "We just lost clearance on 6 aircraft, then 12, now 19. Legal is saying the leases have been recalled. Recalled by who?" There was a pause. Brooks Capital. Marcus felt the floor tilt. That name again. He had heard it twice already that night. Once from legal, once from finance. He had dismissed it both times as a glitch. A misunderstanding. "Get me the CEO," he said. "Now." In a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Robert Langford, chairman and acting chief executive of Summit Air, woke to the sound of his phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. 63 years old. Old money. Old habits. He squinted at the caller ID, annoyed more than alarmed. This better be good, Marcus. It's bad, Robert. It's very bad. We've lost control of the fleet. Silence. Explain. Before Marcus could answer, another line chimed in. Legal. Robert closed his eyes, already knowing. Put them through. Counsel didn't bother with greetings. Brooks Capital has declared default. They're invoking the reputational hazard clause. They're claiming breach due to misconduct against their principal. Robert sat up slowly. His robe fell open, forgotten. What principal? There was another pause. This one heavier. Ethan Brooks. The name landed like a physical blow. Robert stared at the far wall, where a framed photo of a Summit Air inaugural flight hung, all smiles and champagne and certainty. He had signed off on the Brooks Capital leases himself. He remembered the meeting. Quiet man. No theatrics, unsettling eyes. You're telling me, Robert said carefully, that the man we just removed from a plane is the man who owns it. Counsel swallowed. Yes. Back at JFK, Ethan slid into the back seat of a black sedan, rain hammering the roof. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, recognized something in his posture, and said nothing. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Brooks, the voice said, breathless. This is Robert Langford from Summit Air. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Ethan watched the terminal recede through rain-streaked glass. A misunderstanding is when two people read the same email differently, he said. This was a decision. We're prepared to make this right, Robert said quickly. We'll fire the captain, the crew, issue a public apology, whatever you want. Ethan closed his eyes, not in anger, but in exhaustion. You think this is about optics, he said, about giving the crowd someone to blame. Isn't it? No. The word was flat. Absolute. You built a culture where power speaks louder than truth, where comfort matters more than rights, where a woman can point at a man and say she feels unsafe, and the system moves to protect her feelings without asking what they cost. That wasn't an accident, Robert. That was policy. We can talk about compensation, Robert said. Name a number. Ethan almost smiled. I don't need your money. Then what do you want? Ethan opened his eyes. The city blurred past, lights smeared into gold and white. I want control. The line went dead. In Dallas, the boardroom lights came on one by one. Executives arrived in various states of disarray. Ties crooked, jackets thrown over chairs, eyes red. The wall screens told the story without mercy. Summit Air stock was in free fall. Analysts were already circling, commentators smelling blood. Marcus Hale stood at the head of the table, hands braced against polished wood. This is not a PR issue, he said. This is a liquidity event. We miss payroll in 4 days if this continues. A board member scoffed weakly. He's bluffing. He can't ground an entire airline over a seat dispute. Legal shook her head. He can. And he has. Another screen flickered on. A news clip. Shaky footage. Ethan being dragged down the aisle. Margaret's voice shrill in the background. Captain Carter barking orders. The clip cut to a second video. The aircraft sitting dark on the tarmac, emergency lights flashing. A caption crawled along the bottom. He owns the plane. The room fell silent. At the Ritz, Ethan stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor, the city laid out beneath him like a map. Jonathan Reed was already there, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. We've crossed 50% voting control, Jonathan said. Shells closed an hour ago. Quietly. Ethan nodded. Summit's council is requesting an emergency injunction, Jonathan continued. We'll crush it by morning. Good. Jonathan hesitated. There are 15,000 employees, Ethan. If this goes all the way. Ethan turned to the window, watched a plane lift off in the distance, lights cutting through cloud. I know exactly how many people work for that company, he said. That's why this ends with them flying again. Just not under the same hands. Jonathan understood. He always did. Down in Dallas, Robert Langford loosened his tie and stared at the board, at the red lines, at the truth finally laid bare. Get Brooks on the next flight here, he said quietly. Someone laughed, hysterical. He's not flying Summit, sir. Robert closed his eyes. No, he said. He's coming on to collect it. Morning came without mercy. In Dallas, the sun rose pale and sharp, cutting through the glass facade of Summit Air headquarters like a blade. The building had always been designed to project certainty, steel, glass, height. This morning it looked brittle, like something already cracking from the inside. By 7:30 in the morning, the lobby was sealed. Security stood shoulder to shoulder as reporters pressed against the doors, cameras hoisted, voices overlapping into a constant, angry hum. Words like discrimination, grounding, takeover, and billionaire ricocheted through the air. A woman from a morning news show rehearsed her lines under her breath. A man from a financial network smiled too eagerly, already tasting the story. On the 50th floor, the boardroom filled slowly. No one sat at the head of the table. Robert Langford stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the city. He had slept for maybe 40 minutes. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had 12 hours ago. The confidence that once lived easily in his shoulders now felt borrowed. They'll be here soon, Marcus Hale said, checking his watch for the third time in a minute. Who is they? Robert asked without turning. Brooks Capital, legal, and Ethan Brooks himself. The room shifted at the sound of the name. Even now, it felt unreal, like a character miscast in the wrong role. Hoodie man, seat 1A. Owner. You should sit, someone murmured. Robert ignored it. Across the table, Karen Whitfield, chief financial officer, tapped a pen against her legal pad until Marcus shot her a look. She stopped, pressed her lips together, eyes glossy with panic. We're bleeding $12 million an hour, she said. Fuel suppliers want cash. Insurers are circling. If this doesn't resolve today, we won't make payroll." "We will make payroll," Robert snapped, turning at last. "We are not letting 15,000 people pay for one incident." "One incident," Karen repeated softly. "That incident is now the top story on every network in the country." A screen on the far wall flickered to life. Footage looped silently. Ethan being escorted off the plane. The look on his face. Not rage. Not fear. Something worse. Control. Robert looked away. The doors at the far end of the room opened. Not with urgency. Not with force. With intention. Conversation died instantly. Ethan Brooks walked in first. No hoodie. He wore a navy suit cut close to the body, understated, immaculate. No tie. White shirt, open at the collar. Italian leather shoes, dark, polished, quiet on the floor. He moved like a man who did not need permission to enter any room. Behind him came Jonathan Reed, tablet tucked under his arm, eyes scanning everything, already calculating. 2 attorneys followed, both men in their 50s, faces expressionless in the way only people who make a living dismantling other people's power can manage. Security stepped forward instinctively, then stopped. The head of security, a thick-necked man named Carl Jensen, glanced at his phone, then at Ethan, then back at Robert. "Mr. Langford," Carl said carefully, "Brooks Capital now holds controlling interest. They authorized my contract this morning." The words landed hard. Carl stepped aside. The doors closed. Ethan didn't speak at first. He walked the length of the table slowly, fingertips brushing the backs of chairs, eyes moving from face to face. He saw everything. The fear, the resentment, the calculation, the ones already planning how to survive. He stopped at the head of the table. The seat Robert had not taken. Ethan set a thin leather folder down. The sound was soft. Final. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm, even, the kind of voice that made people lean in despite themselves. "I trust you've had a difficult night." Robert cleared his throat. "Ethan, let me start by saying—" "No," Ethan said gently. The word was not loud. It didn't need to be. It cut clean through the room. "You don't start this." Silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. Ethan turned slightly, resting one hand on the table. "Last night, I was removed from an aircraft I paid for. I was physically handled. I was publicly humiliated. Not because of policy, not because of safety, but because someone decided I did not fit their idea of who belongs in certain spaces." He looked directly at Robert now. That decision did not begin with a flight attendant or a captain. It began here. Robert swallowed. "We have policies, Ethan. Sometimes individuals misuse them. We're prepared to take responsibility." "Responsibility," Ethan repeated. "You mean sacrifice." He opened the folder. Inside was a single document. "This is a transfer of control agreement," Ethan said. It states that effective immediately, the current board of directors resigns. Operational control transfers to Brooks Capital. Executive contracts are terminated without severance. Karen gasped softly. Robert stared at the paper. His hands trembled. "This is extortion," he said hoarsely. "No," Ethan replied. "This is consequence." "You can't do this," another board member snapped. "We'll file for Chapter 11. We'll get an injunction." Ethan nodded once. "You could, and I would still win." He gestured to Jonathan, who tapped his tablet. The screen changed. A web of entities, arrows, percentages. "We now own 51% of your voting shares," Ethan said. Quietly. "Legally. If you file for bankruptcy to avoid paying your debt, I will sue each of you personally for fiduciary negligence, and I will pierce the corporate veil." The room went cold. Karen's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. "You're bluffing," Robert whispered. Ethan leaned forward, palms flat on the wood. "I was dragged off a plane in front of strangers. I was treated like a threat because it was convenient. I am done bluffing." His eyes moved again, taking them all in. "If you sign, this company survives. Planes fly. Employees keep their jobs. If you don't, I keep the fleet grounded until this stock hits zero. And then I liquidate what's left. I will make sure the public knows exactly who chose pride over people." The room held its breath. Robert looked down at the document, at the signature line bearing his name. "What happens to us?" he asked quietly. Ethan straightened. "You leave. With your pensions. Nothing more. And you carry this moment with you for the rest of your lives." The pen lay in front of Robert. He picked it up. His hand shook as he signed. One by one, the folder moved around the table. Each signature sounded louder than the last. When it returned to Ethan, he closed it. Jonathan stepped forward. "Liquidity injection is ready. Ground crews are standing by." "Execute it," Ethan said. He turned back to Robert, who was gathering his papers with numb hands. "Leave the briefcase," Ethan added. "Company property." Robert froze, then slowly set it down. As security escorted the former masters of the airline out, Ethan moved to the window. Below, a Summit Air jet began to taxi. Lights on, engines humming. He exhaled once. Balance, at last. The first aircraft lifted off just after noon. From the control tower, it looked ordinary, routine. Another wide body cutting through Texas heat, nose tilting upward, engines roaring with disciplined restraint. But inside Summit Air headquarters, the sound carried like a verdict. Proof that the machine still worked. Proof that the world had not ended. Proof that it had changed hands. Ethan Brooks watched from the 51st floor, arms crossed, posture relaxed but alert. He did not smile. Victories like this were never meant to be celebrated. They were meant to be absorbed, understood, and then put to work. Jonathan Reed stood a step behind him. "Ground crews are back on rotation. FAA holds lifted. International departures will resume within the hour." "Good," Ethan said. "And the employees?" Jonathan nodded. Payroll cleared. Union leadership has been notified. They're confused, but relieved. Ethan turned from the window at last. Confusion is fine. Fear is not. Down the hall, the former boardroom had already begun to change. The long mahogany table was gone, replaced with modular desks. The oil paintings had been removed from the walls, leaving pale rectangles where old power used to hang. Someone had taken down the framed slogan that read, "Prestige above all." It lay face down against the wall, forgotten. In another wing of the building, Captain Daniel Carter sat alone in a small conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the table in front of him. Without it, he looked smaller, thinner, a man stripped of context. Across from him sat two people, one from the Federal Aviation Administration, one from Summit Air's new legal department. Neither smiled. "We've reviewed the cockpit voice recordings," the FAA representative said. "Your interaction with passenger Ethan Brooks shows a pattern of escalation without cause." Carter swallowed. "I was following protocol. He was disruptive." The legal representative slid a tablet across the table. Video played. Ethan seated. Calm, hands visible. Voice steady. "Where is the disruption, Captain?" she asked. Carter looked away. "You failed to verify the manifest," the FAA official continued. "You removed a compliant, ticketed passenger, and you attempted to operate an aircraft after receiving a grounding order." That last part hung in the air. "Do you know what that means, Captain?" Carter's jaw tightened. He knew. He had known the moment the tower spoke. "Your airline transport pilot certificate is revoked," the official said. "Effective immediately. Permanently." The word hit harder than Carter expected. "Revoked," he repeated, standing halfway. "You can't do that. I have 30 years of service. You had 30 years of trust," the official replied. "You broke it." Carter sank back into his chair. The room felt suddenly very small. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived at his suburban home in Plano. It was brief, clinical, signed by Summit Air's new counsel. Termination for gross misconduct. Pension voided under the morality clause he had signed decades earlier without reading. Carter stared at the page for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. His wife watched from the doorway, understanding without asking. Across the country, Margaret Whitmore's world collapsed more quietly. No hearings, no formal letters, just silence. Her name stopped appearing on guest lists. Calls went unanswered. A planned benefit dinner was postponed, then cancelled. A long-time friend sent a polite text suggesting space might be best for now. At a lunch, she insisted on attending anyway. The room went still when she entered. Conversations resumed only after she sat, eyes fixed on her plate. That night, her husband told her the firm could not afford the association, not with pension funds threatening to pull out, not with the video still circulating, her voice shrill and unmistakable. The divorce was efficient. Cold. Lawyers spoke where spouses no longer could. The settlement was minimal. The prenuptial clause was ironclad. "You're grounded," he told her, without malice. "Indefinitely." Back in Dallas, Ethan's days began to blur. Meetings stacked on meetings, training programs drafted overnight. A new department formed where none had existed before: guest equity and conflict resolution. On the third week, Lauren Hayes sat in a waiting room, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. She had rehearsed apologies in her head until they lost meaning. 15 years with the airline. Commendations for safety. Not one complaint. Until now. The door opened. Ethan stood there himself. "Come in," he said. Lauren's knees felt weak as she stepped inside. The office was stripped down. No art, no trophies, just light, glass, and a city far below. "Sit," Ethan said. She did. "I'm sorry," she began, words tumbling over each other. You should have stopped it," Ethan finished. "When it mattered." She nodded, tears threatening. "I was afraid. Of the passenger, of the captain, of losing my job." "I know," Ethan said. "That fear was built into the system. That's why the system failed." Lauren looked up, hope flickering. "Am I fired?" "No." Her breath caught. "You're promoted," Ethan continued. She blinked. "What?" "You're going to run our new training division. You'll teach every new hire exactly what went wrong on Flight 909. You'll teach them how fear disguises itself as policy, and how to recognize the moment they're about to choose convenience over dignity." Lauren's hands trembled. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Ethan said, "because you know what it costs to stay silent." She nodded slowly. "Yes, I can." "Good. Your salary is doubled. Start Monday." When she left the office, she felt lighter than she had in years. Months passed. The name Summit Air disappeared from aircraft tales across the world. In its place, a new color scheme emerged. Deep blue, clean lines. A new logo, balanced, quiet. Fairway Airlines. Profits returned, then grew. Not because of marketing, because of trust. 1 year later, rain fell again at JFK. Ethan Brooks walked into the terminal carrying his own bag. No entourage, no announcement. Just a man in a blazer and jeans moving with purpose. At the gate, a businessman argued loudly with a young agent about baggage weight. His voice rose. The line stiffened. The agent did not flinch. "Sir," she said calmly, "if you continue to speak to me that way, I will deny boarding." The man stopped, looked around, realized the room was no longer on his side. "Fine," he muttered, handing over his card. Ethan watched from behind, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. On board, he took his seat. 1A. The cabin lights dimmed, engines hummed. The plane began to move. This time, no one touched his arm. This time, the door closed without incident. This time, the sky belonged to him. The silence after success is louder than failure. Ethan Brooks learned that in the weeks that followed, when the cameras moved on, when the analysts stopped calling, when Fairway Airlines settled into its new rhythm, and the world decided the story was finished. It wasn't. In a quiet office overlooking the Dallas skyline, Ethan sat alone at a plain desk, sleeves rolled up, jacket draped over the back of his chair. The city below moved in patterns he had memorized years ago. Traffic like veins, lights like signals, systems within systems, all pretending to be neutral. Jonathan Reed stood near the window, scrolling through a report. Complaints are down 40% quarter over quarter. Employee retention is up. But there's something else. Ethan didn't look up. Say it. Jonathan hesitated. We're seeing resistance. Quiet resistance. Middle management. Old habits. They smile in meetings, nod at the new language, then default back when no one's watching. Ethan finally looked at him. Of course they do. He leaned back, folding his hands. Culture doesn't break when you fire executives. It breaks when ordinary people realize the rules have changed and they no longer know how to protect themselves. Jonathan studied him. So what's the move? Ethan stood, walked to the window, watched a fairway jet arc upward, blue tail flashing in the sun. We make it visible, he said. We make dignity measurable. The first test came sooner than expected. 3 weeks later, a regional manager in Phoenix flagged an incident. A gate agent had denied boarding to an elderly Latino man after a white passenger complained he looked suspicious. No slurs, no shouting, just tone, just implication. The agent cited policy. The supervisor backed her. The report was clean. Too clean. Ethan read the file twice, then closed it. Get me the agent, he said. And the supervisor. And the passenger who complained. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. All of them. All of them. They arrived 2 days later. The conference room was small. No long table. No hierarchy. Just chairs in a circle. The agent, Maria Lopez, sat stiffly, hands clasped in her lap. The supervisor avoided eye contact. The passenger, a man named Thomas Bell, crossed his arms, already defensive. Ethan entered last. No suit this time. Dark sweater. Calm face. Thank you for coming, he said, sitting. Let's talk. Maria spoke first, voice trembling. I followed protocol. He didn't have pre-check. He was confused. Mr. Bell said he felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, Ethan repeated softly. Why? Bell shifted. Look, I travel a lot. You learn to spot things. He just seemed off. Off how? Bell opened his mouth, closed it. You know. Ethan leaned forward. I don't. The room tightened. Maria's eyes flicked between them. I didn't want trouble, she said. I just wanted the line to move. Ethan nodded. That's usually how it starts. He turned to the supervisor. And you approved it. The supervisor swallowed. I trusted my team. You trusted the complaint, Ethan said, not the evidence. No one spoke. Ethan let the silence work. Mr. Bell, he said at last, you were not harmed. You missed nothing. But your discomfort nearly cost someone else their flight, their dignity. That imbalance matters here. Bell scoffed. So what? I'm the bad guy now. No, Ethan replied. You're the mirror. He stood. Maria, you're not fired. She looked up, stunned. But you are being reassigned. Training. You'll learn how to slow down when pressure tells you to rush, when fear tells you to comply. He turned to the supervisor. You're on probation. One more decision like that, and you're done. Then he looked back at Bell. And you, sir, are banned from Fairway Airlines. Bell shot to his feet. For what? For abusing a system that no longer exists. The ban went into effect that afternoon. Quietly, efficiently, word spread. Not on the news, in break rooms, on layovers. In hushed conversations between crew members who began to understand something fundamental had shifted. Fairway was not safe for bullies anymore. In Newark, a flight attendant intervened when a businessman snapped his fingers at a cleaner. In Atlanta, a gate agent refused to downgrade a young woman because a higher status passenger demanded her seat. In Chicago, a pilot paused boarding to verify a complaint instead of accepting it at face value. None of it made headlines. That was the point. One evening, long after the building had emptied, Ethan sat alone again, reviewing reports. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Brooks, the voice said, careful, polished. This is Senator William Hart's office. The senator would like a conversation. Ethan closed his laptop. About your policies, your bans. There are concerns about overreach. Ethan smiled faintly. There always are. The call ended politely. Nothing resolved, everything implied. Jonathan found him later, concern etched into his face. Politics is circling. Good, Ethan said. That means we're doing something real. Jonathan studied him. You could have stopped at the takeover. You won. Why keep pushing? Ethan thought of the jet bridge, the grip on his arm, the way the world had decided who he was in a second. Because winning isn't enough, he said. Systems don't change when the powerful get hurt once. They change when the powerless stop getting hurt quietly. Outside, night settled over Dallas. Planes lifted into the dark one by one, engines steady, lights blinking against the sky. Each carried hundreds of small, ordinary stories. People going home, people leaving, people trusting a machine and a system to treat them fairly for a few hours. Ethan watched until the last light disappeared. Then he turned back to work. The backlash didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived with paperwork. 3 months after Fairway Airlines posted its strongest quarter in a decade, a thin envelope appeared on Ethan Brooks's desk. No logo, no return address. Inside was a formal notice from the Department of Transportation, announcing a compliance review into Fairway's revised passenger conduct and denial of service policies. Jonathan Reed read it twice, jaw tight. This is pressure. They're not accusing us of anything specific. They're fishing. Ethan didn't look surprised. He was standing at the window, watching a storm gather over the city. Thunderheads stacking like slow decisions finally made. Let them fish, he said. We've been careful. Careful isn't the same as safe, Jonathan replied, You've banned people, denied service, that always invites scrutiny. Ethan turned. You think I don't know that? Jonathan hesitated, then softer. I think you're daring them to blink. Ethan didn't answer. The first hearing was scheduled in Washington 2 weeks later. Not a courtroom, a conference room with bad lighting and worse acoustics. 3 officials from the DOT sat on one side of a long table. 2 attorneys from Fairway sat on the other. Ethan sat alone at the end, hands folded, expression unreadable. Mr. Brooks, said the chairwoman, a woman in her early 60s with a practiced neutrality. There are concerns that Fairway's new policies may disproportionately impact certain demographics. Ethan met her gaze. Which ones? The chairwoman glanced at her notes. Frequent travelers, premium customers, individuals with long-standing loyalty status. Ethan nodded. You mean people who are used to being indulged? One of the attorneys shifted. Mr. Brooks, the issue is not indulgence. It's access. Access to what? Ethan asked. To seats they didn't pay for. To staff they feel entitled to demean. To systems they assume will bend for them. The room tightened. Another official spoke. There are reports of bans issued without appeal. That's correct, Ethan said. That is highly unusual. So was being dragged off a plane for existing, Ethan replied. But here we are. Silence followed. Not hostile, evaluative. The chairwoman leaned back. You understand that airlines operate under federal obligation to provide service without discrimination. Ethan inclined his head. I understand that better than most. Then you must also understand the concern that personal experiences may be influencing corporate policy. Ethan's eyes sharpened, just slightly. Personal experiences influence all policy. The difference is whether we admit it. The hearing ended without conclusion. That was expected. Outside, cameras waited. Ethan ignored them. That night, Fairway's social media feeds lit up. Hashtags split the public cleanly down the middle. Some praised the airline for standing up to abuse. Others accused it of elitism in reverse. Talk shows debated whether dignity could be regulated. Commentators argued over whether power wielded ethically was still power. Ethan watched none of it. Instead, he flew. Not in first class, not privately. Economy. Seat 17, C middle. The man beside him was reading a paperback thriller. The woman across the aisle slept with her mouth open, exhaustion written plainly on her face. A child kicked the back of Ethan's seat twice, then stopped when the mother whispered something urgent and apologetic. No one recognized him. That was the point. At cruising altitude, the man beside him glanced over. You fly Fairway a lot. Ethan smiled faintly. I try to. They treat you okay? Ethan looked around. The calm cabin, the quiet efficiency, the absence of fear. Yeah, he said. They do. The man nodded, satisfied, and went back to his book. In the galley, a flight attendant named Rachel poured coffee for a line of passengers. Her movements were steady, her voice warm but firm. When a man complained loudly about the wait, she didn't flinch. Sir, she said, I'll be with you shortly. If you continue speaking to me that way, I will step away. The man huffed, then fell silent. Rachel caught Ethan watching. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or relief. After landing, Ethan waited his turn to deplane. No rush, no clearing of aisles. In the terminal, a woman in her 70s struggled with a bag. A younger man stepped in to help without being asked. No one filmed it. No one applauded. Small things. Back in Dallas, Jonathan met him with another update. The DOT isn't backing off. They want another hearing. Public this time. Ethan nodded. Good. Jonathan searched his face. You know what this becomes if you lose. Ethan did. He had known from the beginning. If they rule against us, Jonathan continued, they'll call it precedent. Every airline will quietly return to business as usual. Ethan stopped walking. Then this can't just be about Fairway, he said. Jonathan frowned. What are you thinking? Ethan resumed, steps measured. We take this bigger, industry-wide. That evening, invitations went out. Not to politicians, not to donors, to pilots, to flight attendants, to gate agents, to cleaners, to people who worked the margins of the system and knew exactly how it failed. The forum was held in a converted hangar outside Dallas, folding chairs, no stage, no spotlight. Ethan stood in the center. I'm not here to speak for you, he said. I'm here to listen. They spoke. Stories poured out, of subtle bias, of pressure from above, of fear of complaints, of moments they wished they could take back. Ethan listened to everyone. When the forum ended, long after midnight, Jonathan approached him quietly. This won't help legally, he said. It might hurt. Ethan looked around the empty chairs, the scuffed floor. Then it will help something else. The public hearing came. This time the room was full. Cameras, observers, advocates, critics. Ethan took the seat alone again. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Mr. Brooks, given the attention surrounding your airline, we need clarity. Is Fairway's approach sustainable? Is it lawful? And is it fair? Ethan leaned forward. Fairness isn't comfort, he said. It's consistency. If you treat dignity as optional, it will always be withheld from the same people. I built Fairway to remove that option. A murmur rippled through the room. You are asking us to endorse a moral standard, one official said. No, Ethan replied. I'm asking you to stop pretending there isn't one already. The hearing adjourned. Outside, the sky hung low and grey. Jonathan exhaled. That could have gone worse. It could have gone better, Ethan said. Jonathan studied him. You're not done. Ethan watched a Fairway jet lift into the clouds. No, he said quietly. I'm just getting to the part where it costs something. The storm finally broke. The ruling came on a Tuesday morning, quiet and precise, the way institutions prefer to deliver consequences. Ethan Brooks read it once, then again, not because he needed to understand it, but because he needed to feel its weight. The Department of Transportation would not block Fairway Airlines' policies outright. They would not endorse them either. Instead, they issued a conditional framework, a narrow corridor of legality lined with requirements, audits, and oversight. A compromise dressed as balance. Jonathan Reed stood across the desk, hands in his pockets. That's as close to a win as we were going to get. Ethan nodded slowly. It wasn't defeat, but it wasn't freedom. It means scrutiny never stops, Jonathan continued. Annual reviews, data transparency, public reporting on every denial of service. Good, Ethan said. Let them watch. Jonathan hesitated. The board will push back. Quietly. They'll say this limits growth. Growth at whose expense? Ethan asked. Jonathan didn't answer. The first report went public a week later. Pages of numbers. Percentages. Context. Names removed. Patterns exposed. It showed exactly who had been denied boarding, why, and how often appeals succeeded. It showed bias where bias lived. It showed restraint where restraint mattered. The response was immediate. Advocacy groups praised the transparency. Competing airlines dismissed it as impractical. Commentators argued that Fairway was turning air travel into a social experiment. Ethan listened to none of it. Instead, he flew again. This time, Los Angeles to Chicago. Late evening. The cabin dim, the hum of engines a constant, reassuring presence. Ethan sat by the window, watching the lights scatter below like fallen constellations. 2 rows ahead, a young woman clutched her phone, eyes darting toward the aisle. She wore a service uniform. Not Fairway. Another airline. She kept checking the time, breathing shallow. When the plane hit mild turbulence, she flinched. "You okay?" Ethan asked gently, when she turned back, startled. She nodded too quickly. "Sorry, I don't love flying when I'm not working. You work for an airline." She laughed once, short and tired. "Yeah. Gate agent. Or I was. Was." She shrugged. "Customer complained. Said I had an attitude. Supervisor didn't ask questions. They pulled me off the schedule pending review." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Did you?" She shook her head. "I told him his bag was overweight. He called me names. I stayed calm. That was the problem." Ethan nodded. "What airline?" She hesitated. "Doesn't matter." "It does," Ethan said. She studied him, then sighed. "North Star Air." Ethan leaned back, eyes forward. He knew the name. Everyone did. When they landed, Ethan walked with her to the terminal. He didn't give her his card, didn't promise anything, just listened. Sometimes that was the intervention. Back in Dallas, Fairway's internal numbers told a different story than the headlines. Incidents were down. Not complaints. Incidents. Fewer escalations. Fewer removals. More pauses. More verification. But revenue growth had slowed. At a closed board session, a director finally said what others had been thinking. "We're losing high spenders." Ethan met his gaze. "We're losing abusers." The director stiffened. "There's a difference." "No," Ethan replied. "There isn't. Not anymore." Silence stretched, calculations recalibrated. That night, Ethan stayed late, alone in the office. The city pulsed below, indifferent to ideals. He thought of the young woman from the plane, of Lauren Hayes, of Maria Lopez, of the countless names he would never know. His phone buzzed. "Jonathan." "We've got a problem," he said. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Tell me." North Star Air just announced a partnership with a private equity group. New leadership. Aggressive restructuring. Ethan straightened. "Who?" Jonathan hesitated. "A fund called Meridian Axis." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Meridian, knew their playbook. Cut costs, silence dissent, monetize loyalty at any price. "They're rolling back complaint protections," Jonathan continued, quietly, reinstating discretion clauses. Fairway's data made it easier for them to know exactly where to push. Ethan stared out at the dark. "So the backlash isn't just against us," he said. "It's adapting." Jonathan nodded. "They're using your transparency to avoid scrutiny." Ethan turned. "Then we stop playing defense." Jonathan frowned. "What does that look like?" Ethan walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker. "We publish the framework," he said, writing as he spoke. "Open source. Make it available to every airline, every regulator, every union." Jonathan blinked. "You want to give away the system?" "I want to remove the excuse," Ethan replied. "If dignity is optional, they'll always opt out. If it's standardized, they have to justify why they won't comply." Jonathan studied the board. "That makes this bigger than Fairway." "It already is." Within days, Fairway released the framework publicly. Policies, training modules, data definitions, everything. The industry reacted with outrage. "You can't force morality," one CEO said on television. Ethan watched the clip once, then muted it. "No," he said quietly. "But you can expose its absence." The DOT called again. This time, not to warn. "They want to convene a task force," Jonathan said. "Industry-wide standards." Ethan nodded. "Good." In Phoenix, Maria Lopez stood in front of a classroom of new hires, hands steady, voice clear. In Newark, Rachel intervened again, this time with confidence that didn't shake. In Chicago, a pilot waited for confirmation instead of assuming. None of them knew Ethan personally. They didn't need to. Months later, a report surfaced about North Star Air. Viral footage. A man removed from a flight after a complaint that sounded familiar. Too familiar. The difference was what happened next. Employees spoke up. Passengers cited Fairway's framework. Regulators asked questions. North Star backtracked. Meridian Axis issued a statement. Damage control disguised as reflection. Ethan watched it all from 30,000 feet, flying west, the sun setting in slow motion outside his window. The world hadn't changed, but it was learning how to resist. He rested his head against the glass, eyes half closed, listening to the engines. Steady, reliable, built on systems that worked when maintained. For the first time in a long while, Ethan allowed himself a breath. Not relief. Resolve. The first real cost arrived quietly, disguised as an invitation. Ethan Brooks found it waiting on his desk when he returned from Chicago. Heavy paper, Embossed seal. A private forum hosted in New York by an alliance of major carriers, financial backers, and policy advisors. Closed doors. Off the record. A chance, they said, to reset the conversation. Jonathan Reed read the letter over Ethan's shoulder. This is where they try to corner you. Ethan folded the paper once. Precise. Then I should go. The meeting took place in a private room above a mid-town hotel, the kind with thick carpet that swallowed sound and windows designed not to open. The city outside moved as if nothing inside could possibly matter. They were already seated when Ethan entered. Men and women in tailored suits, hair silvered by time and advantage. Names that carried weight in aviation, finance, and government. Some he recognized, others he knew by reputation alone. A man at the head of the table rose halfway. Ethan Brooks. Thank you for coming. Ethan nodded, took the empty chair. He noticed there was only one. No allies, no buffer. Let's be direct, the man continued. What you've done with Fairway has created instability. Instability for whom? Ethan asked. A murmur rippled. The man smiled thinly. For an industry that relies on predictability, on discretion. Discretion, Ethan repeated. You mean unchallenged authority? Another voice joined in. You've politicized air travel. No, Ethan said. I've exposed it. A woman across the table leaned forward. You've made every interaction a potential incident. Employees second-guess themselves. Customers feel watched. Ethan met her gaze. Accountability feels like surveillance to people who are used to immunity. The room cooled. A third voice, older, measured. You're forcing regulators to act. That invites legislation. Oversight. None of us want that. Ethan rested his hands on the table. Then stopped behaving like oversight is a threat. Silence followed. Not stunned. Appraising. The man at the head cleared his throat. What would it take for you to step back? Ethan tilted his head slightly. Step back from what? From pushing this framework. From challenging long-established norms. From making every airline answer for every complaint. Ethan's eyes hardened. You want me to make this easier for you? We want compromise, the man said smoothly. Ethan leaned back. Compromise is what got us here. He stood. Chairs shifted, startled. This meeting is about control, he said. You don't want fairness. You want quiet. You want the old system to survive with new language. That won't happen. He gathered his coat. If you want predictability, build something worth trusting. If you want silence, buy it somewhere else. He left without waiting for a response. Outside, New York air hit him sharp and loud. Horns, footsteps, life. Jonathan met him on the sidewalk. How bad was it? Ethan exhaled slowly. They're scared. That's good. It's dangerous. Jonathan smiled faintly. Those are usually the same thing. The retaliation came 2 weeks later. Not public, not obvious. Fairway's largest aircraft order was delayed. Financing stalled. A supplier suddenly demanded revised terms. Analysts downgraded the stock on vague concerns about leadership risk. The message was clear. Fall in line. At an emergency board meeting, tension snapped. "We're bleeding leverage," a director said. "You're picking fights we don't need." Ethan listened. Let them speak. He always did. Another director leaned forward. This was never supposed to be a crusade. Ethan finally responded. "You're right. It wasn't." He looked around the room. "Became one because too many people told me to be reasonable after something unreasonable happened. Because every time I was told to move on, someone else stayed stuck." "We're a business," the director snapped. "So am I," Ethan replied. "And this business survives because people trust us not to humiliate them when it's inconvenient." The vote that followed was close. Too close. Fairway would continue its policies, but expansion would pause. The framework would remain public, but Ethan would step back from advocating industry-wide adoption. A half measure. Jonathan met Ethan afterward in the hallway. "They're trying to contain you." Ethan nodded. "I know." That night, he flew again. Short hop, Dallas to Denver, window seat, mountains cutting the horizon like teeth. Across the aisle, two men argued quietly about overhead space. A flight attendant approached, calm, practiced. She listened, she verified. She resolved it without raising her voice. The men settled. No winner, no loser. Just order. Ethan watched, heart steady. In Denver, a storm delayed departures. Passengers sprawled across the terminal, frustration simmering. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly. An older couple shared snacks from a paper bag. A gate agent knelt to speak eye level with a crying child. Normal. Human. His phone buzzed. "Jonathan. We've got a leak." Ethan closed his eyes. "From where?" "Internal." Someone fed the press a narrative. That Fairway is unstable. That you're erratic. That leadership is divided. Ethan absorbed it. Names. We don't know yet. Ethan thought of the meeting in New York, of the empty chair, of the people who had smiled without warmth. "Find out," he said, quietly. 2 days later, Jonathan returned with a name. A mid-level executive. Ambitious. Well-connected. Afraid. Ethan asked to meet him. The man arrived pale, hands shaking, apology already forming. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "They said it was just perspective." "Perspective is a story told by whoever holds the microphone," Ethan replied. He studied the man. "You didn't break a rule. You broke trust." The man nodded, eyes wet. "I'll resign." "No," Ethan said. The man looked up, confused. "You'll stay, and you'll fix what you tried to undermine. Publicly, transparently, or you'll leave with nothing." The man agreed without hesitation. Word spread internally, faster than any memo. Fairway didn't crush dissent. It confronted it. Slowly, something shifted again. The press cycle moved on. Investors adjusted. Suppliers renegotiated. The industry learned Fairway wasn't bluffing, but it also wasn't reckless. It was patient. One evening, Ethan returned to his office late, the building quiet, the city glowing. On his desk lay a handwritten note. No letterhead, no seal. It read simply, "My mother flew fairway last week. She said it was the first time she felt invisible in the good way. Thank you." Ethan held the note for a long time. The cost had been real. Money, influence, peace. But so was the return. Outside, a fairway jet crossed the sky, lights steady, unremarkable. Exactly as it should be. Ethan turned off the light and left the office, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. Not fighting power, but outlasting it. The anniversary passed without ceremony. No gala, no speech, no press release congratulating anyone for surviving what had almost broken them. Ethan Brooks preferred it that way. Change that needed applause was usually cosmetic. The kind that mattered settled in quietly, like new habits people forgot they'd once had to learn. On a grey morning in early fall, Ethan stood at Gate C-19 at JFK, coffee cooling in his hand. He wore a dark jacket, jeans. Nothing remarkable. Around him, travellers moved with the familiar choreography of departure. Shoes off, bags open, patience thinning. Life compressed into lines and minutes. The gate agent announced boarding for Fairway Airlines Flight 909. The number still carried weight for Ethan. Not as a scar, as a marker. A before and after. Boarding began smoothly. No raised voices. No snapped fingers. When a man tried to push past an older woman, the line didn't part for him. It corrected itself. Subtly. Collectively. Ethan noticed everything. On board, the cabin lights glowed soft blue. A child laughed. A flight attendant knelt to help an elderly man stow his bag without asking for thanks. Two strangers exchanged seats so a couple could sit together. No announcement, no reward, just instinct. Ethan took his seat. Window. Mid-cabin. Not 1A. He hadn't sat there in months. The engines hummed as the plane pushed back. Rain streaked the glass, turning the runway lights into long white lines. For a moment, memory pressed in. The grip on his arm. The silence. The door closing without him. Then the engines grew louder. The plane accelerated. Lift! Ethan closed his eyes as they climbed through the cloud layer. Above it, the sky was clear. Sunlight spilled across the wing, bright and ordinary. That was the real victory. Ordinary. Later, in Dallas, Fairway's quarterly numbers came in. Stable. Not explosive. Sustainable. Employee satisfaction up. Incidents down. Complaints still existed. They always would. But the pattern had changed. They were about delays. Weather. Missed connections. Not dignity. In the training center, Lauren Hayes stood before a room of new hires. She didn't use slides. She told stories. About fear. About pressure. About the moment you decide who you are when no one is watching. In Phoenix, Maria Lopez finished her shift and smiled when a passenger thanked her. In Newark, Rachel corrected a man politely and watched him correct himself. In Chicago, a pilot paused boarding to verify a concern instead of assuming. None of them thought of Ethan Brooks. That was the point. The industry adjusted. Slowly. Reluctantly. Then all at once. A second airline adopted the framework. Then a third. Not because of morality, because data showed it worked. Fewer incidents meant fewer delays. Fewer lawsuits. Fewer viral videos that destroyed trust overnight. Regulators stopped circling and started collaborating. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but honestly. The old alliance that had summoned Ethan to New York dissolved quietly. Their meetings grew smaller, their influence thinner. Power that relies on silence doesn't survive exposure. One evening, Ethan returned to the hangar where it had all started. The folding chairs were gone, the space empty. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, listening to the echo of his own footsteps. Jonathan Reed joined him, unannounced as always. "You could have sold Fairway," Jonathan said. "Walked away richer than anyone here." Ethan nodded. "I know. Why didn't you?" Ethan looked up at the darkened ceiling. "Because I didn't want to win and leave the rules intact." Jonathan smiled. "You changed more than an airline." Ethan shrugged. "I proved something. People will protect dignity if you give them permission to." They walked out together, the hangar lights shutting off behind them. Years from now, the story would be simplified. Headlines always do that. A billionaire, a takeover, a dramatic fall and rise. People would argue about motives, about whether it was too much, not enough. Ethan didn't care. What mattered was quieter. A woman boarding without bracing herself. A man correcting his tone before someone else had to. A system that paused before punishing. Those things didn't trend. They endured. As Fairway Flight 909 touched down that night, smooth and unremarkable, Ethan gathered his bag and waited his turn. No rush, no privilege, just arrival. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that power doesn't have to be loud to be absolute, take a second to like the video, subscribe for more stories like this, and comment these 3 words: own your space.